What if your salvation wasn't just about you? Not just about where you go when you die, but about how you live. What if God's plan was bigger than church attendance, bigger than rule keeping, bigger than living a religious life in the world? What if you weren't just saved from something, but what if you were saved for something? What if He's calling you to love where others withdraw, to create where others consume, to build and to bless, to bring beauty and hope? What if you were saved to live for the life of the world?
Okay, so in Luke chapter 9, Jesus says something that's really interesting. He says, no one who puts their hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. He's talking about if you're gonna follow me, you can't start looking back at your old ways, your old life. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because we don't wanna be caught looking back at our past mistakes, our guilt, our shame, our decisions, our actions that we regret. We have all that in our past. And he says, if you put your hand in the plow, you don't look back. You know why? Because I took care of all that. That's part of one of the benefits of coming to faith. All that's taken care of. I died for that, so you don't have to deal with it and live with it any longer. Now, there might still be some consequences to it. I get that, but we can get caught back in those doom loops of past behaviors, those old patterns, those old habits. He said, you don't look back at that, right? That makes a lot of sense, especially when you talk about what have we been saved from, right? We've been saved from all those things, and so we don't have to worry about them any longer. But the question we're asking is, what have we been saved for? And there's another element of looking back, because sometimes we can look back, not at our past mistakes, but we can look back at the good old days, right? Back when things were easy, it was fun, it was, we had influence, right? And I think for Christians, we can get caught doing this. I think we can look back in our history. Can we remember a time in our country when, God used to have a place in our world and in our culture, and churches were packed, and, public meetings would begin with a word of prayer, and everybody was kind of on the same page spiritually. We all kind of had the same basic value system, and we had the same priorities and all those things, and we can look back in those things as the good old days. But sometimes that's just nostalgia, because let's just be honest, those good old days were never really as good as we thought they were. We have a way of idealizing them and romanticizing them. And I think sometimes we're called not to look back at our past mistakes, but we don't want to get caught back in the paralysis of nostalgia, thinking if we could only go back there, right? If I could only look back and we could recreate the past. And sometimes we can get caught looking back thinking, how do we get back there? And I think sometimes that's where some Christians in our current world, that's kind of their approach. How do we get back to that? And I think what God really has for us is a better question, is how do we live faithfully right now? How do we live faithfully in this moment? How do we live for the life of the world is what we're talking about. That's the question that we are asking. Because if we're living in a world that's become increasingly unfamiliar to us, we know that. We deal with that. We feel the tension of that. We feel the dissonance in that. This world that seems to have jettisoned the values that once shaped a common morality, and it's kind of replaced them with a whole new level of assumptions. And so understandably, Christians have struggled with how to live in this world, how to occupy this world, how to find a way forward in this world. And what have we said? Well, what we've done is we've adopted different strategies. Some Christians adopt a strategy of hiding out, right? They kind of want to remove themselves from the world, and they kind of a bunker mentality. And so they take themselves out of the world and just kind of wait it out, right? And some of them don't want to hide out. They want to take over. They treat culture as a battlefield. And the goal is just to win, right? This is kind of like, the goal is just how do we get back there? Let's fight. We got to get back there, even if it means turning people into enemies. And then there are those who think that the way forward is just to go along with the flow, blending in, compromising our beliefs to the point where our faith becomes invisible. We're no longer distinct. We're no longer unique in our values and our morality, and ultimately we become irrelevant. But the good news is the Bible charts a different course for us. It's not a strategy of behavior, but it's a shift in perspective. It's a whole new way of seeing the world and seeing ourselves in this world. Because salvation, becoming a Christian, doesn't just give you a new set of beliefs. The Bible teaches us that it makes us into new people. We become, as Paul says, new creatures. We are a new creation. And as new creatures and new creations, what that means is we get new priorities and new loyalties and new values and a new calling and a new purpose. And now we have to work out how to live as these new people, even while we continue to live in an old world. And remember, Scripture uses a lot of different word pictures to help us understand our new relationship to this world. Calls us foreigners, calls us aliens, ambassadors, citizens of heaven. But the word we're leaning into is Peter's favorite word. It's the word exiles. We are exiles in this world, much like, and I think Peter was drawing from the imagery of God's people living as exiles among the Babylonian Empire in that culture. And so to be an exile means that we live with the tension that this world is not our home, but it's still the place that we are called to contribute to, that we're called to invest in, to build, to love, and to bless. Because that's what God calls his people to do in the first place, right? You think we have a temptation for spiritual nostalgia. Think about the ancient Israelites, right? They've been conquered. Their nation has been destroyed. Their temple has been pulled down. They've been carted off into exile. They are now captives in Babylon. You think they don't deal with the temptation to look back at the good old days? But God says, I've got another plan for you, and this is what you're going to do. Where you are, while you are here, you're going to seek the peace and the prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. As exiles, God says, we're not just here to devour, we are here to develop. We're not just here to consume, we are here to contribute, to live in this world while not being swallowed up by this world, while not abandoning our principles or compromising our values and losing our distinctiveness in this world. And like I said before, when we understand, we see ourselves as exiles, it helps us to make sense. And suddenly we understand why this world feels dissonant, right? Why there is a tension, why it's not seemingly going the way we want it to go. But it also gives us direction on how we live in this world right here. And what we're doing is we're looking at how do we live for the life of the world, a world that's not our home. How do we contribute and invest? How do we add to this world in different areas or categories of our life? And we've talked so far. We started off week one by just being reminded that we are exiles. Being reminded that there's a reason this world does not feel like home to us. And that's okay. In fact, that's really kind of part of the plan. And then week two, we learned that, hey, if we're going to live an outward-facing, others-focused, self-sacrificial life, where do we first learn to do that? Well, that's in the home. That's where you first learn. It's not all about you. And you learn how to give yourself away for the good of someone else. It happens first in the home, in those relationships that teach us how to be sacrificial, how to serve, how to give ourselves away. And now we're moving out to this next area, and this next arena is probably, honestly, the most overlooked and undervalued arena where we as exiles are called to live out our lives. And it's where we do our work. It's through our vocation, through our careers, through our jobs. Now, man, work, vocation, that's it's a loaded term. Because for some of us, for most of us, work is just where joy goes to die. Right? It's something we just have to do. It's not something we really want to do. It's a necessary evil in our world. Why? Because work allows us to afford the things we actually want to do, right? We get up and we do the things we don't want to do so we can then afford the things or to do the things we actually love to do. But here's the question I want to ask. What if we've misunderstood it? What if work, what if our jobs, our vocations, what if it's not just something that we use to survive? What if this is something we were made for? What if work was the primary way we spend most of our lives living for the life of the world? That's what we're going to get into today. And to get there, we do have to go back a little bit, right? Not to some nostalgic vision of the past, but we're going to go back and reconnect to an ancient vision of faithfulness. That's what God did when he spoke these words to his people living as exiles in a foreign land, a land that did not share their values, speak their language, or worship their God. And what does God say? He says, you're going to work, build houses, settle down, plant gardens, and eat what they produce. God's mission wasn't to make them spectators of this new culture, but participants in that culture's renewal. Now, you may not think of your job as spiritual. You may not imagine your job as something that is sacred, but what if it actually is? What if the ordinary rhythm of your 9 to 5 is actually one of the most powerful ways you can participate in God's renewal of the world? It just makes sense. That's where we're going to spend most of our time. So what we're going to do is we're going to rethink it. We're going to reclaim it. And hopefully today, we're going to rediscover how our everyday work might actually be the sacred space where God's plan breaks through into the ordinary. First thing we got to remember, kind of the thing that is the underpinning to all of this is that creation included work from the very beginning. Vocation and the significance of vocation were written into the code of creation. You go back to the very first chapters of the book of Genesis, right? We find what's called the creation account, but Genesis doesn't just tell us how life began, it gives us a tone for how life was meant to be lived. And one of the most surprising things you're gonna notice in the creation account is just how prominent work is in that whole account. Work is on full display all throughout the creation of the world. In fact, in those first few moments of the creation story, when we are first introduced to God, we find him at work. And the first thing we can actually know about him, the first bullet point of theology, is that we worship a God who works. Look at this. By the seventh day, God had finished the work that he had been doing. And so on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. And then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Now here's what's interesting. That Hebrew word for work that is assigned to God and the work that God does describes the work of God is the same word that is used in other places to describe ordinary human work. Now we look at that, we think we should be impressed, right? God is doing ordinary work. But in reality, what that means is there's no such thing as ordinary work. And when we see God working, God is not lowering himself to the level of work as much as it is him elevating our understanding of work to its true status in creation. So God is not stooping to our level so that he can give us an example to work or encourage us to work. He is working because work is what he does. It's not a demeaning activity. And that means that all work has dignity and inherent significance. God works, and he wrote work into the code of creation, which meant we were made to work. We were made for work. Genesis chapter 1, God blessed them. He created man and woman. He blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful, increase in number. And then he says, this is the mandate, fill the earth, and the word there is to subdue it. Now that word means you're going to wrestle with the earth, right? This idea of subduing doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but there's work that is involved as we subdue the earth. And what does it mean to subdue the earth? Well, let's go back and remember. We're talking about the Garden of Eden, right? And we imagine the garden as pristine, manicured, orderly, right? It's landscaped. But this idea of us subduing it carries with it this thought that creation was good and it was complete in that it had everything we would ever need. So creation was good and it was in a way complete, but it was still, on another level, it was still wild. It was still undeveloped. And what God does, remember, he starts the process by bringing, we're going to talk about this later, order into creation, order into chaos. Then he gives us the mandate. He commissions us to continue that work, to continue to bring order into the world by subduing the world, right? By working in the world, by opposing the chaos that's natural to this world. And I love how Tim Keller says it this way. He says, God left creation with deep, untapped potential for cultivation that people were to unlock through their labor. So God gave us all this, like he gave us the perfect world to work in and left us with plenty of work to do. It's amazing. What that means is work was a part of paradise. Work was there from the beginning. Work was there before sin entered the picture. We think, because of how we misunderstand work and how we misappropriate our work, that work was punishment because it feels like punishment. But I want you to understand, God introduced work before man introduced sin. And we think man introduces sin into the world, and so as a response, God introduces work into the world, but that's not true. We have forgotten that work was something we were made to do. It's something we were designed to do, and we were destined to do. I want you to see this. It's contained in the very fact that we are called image bearers. What does it mean to be an image bearer? Look what it says. Genesis chapter 1, God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky and over the livestock and all the wild animals and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So here's the thing. Humanity is set apart from every other creature, right? We are a creation, we are a creature, but we are unlike any other creatures on the face of the earth. Because unlike all the other creatures, mankind wasn't just made, we were made in the image of God. Now, we've heard that before, but what does that mean exactly? A lot has been written about it, and some people think, well, it means because we carry, not all of them, but some of God's attributes in us. Like, that's true, right? There's some things about us that we have and we can do, that we can replicate that only God can do, right? There's creativity in us, there's a consciousness to us, all of these things, right? There's things that we have that bear the image of God. But it also carries the idea of God's authority. So it's not just the replication of God's characteristics within us, but it's also this exercise of God's authority through us. He didn't just make us like him, he bestowed upon us, basically kind of deputized us, commissioned us to lead out, to carry his image, to have authority over the world that he created for us. So wherever we are a picture of God's authority in the world. And this is true because and the people who read this, the ancient world in which this came out of, they understood that because in the ancient world, when you had a king that had conquered many countries, right, a king over an empire, how did that king keep control over that empire? How did the empire know that this was the king that was in charge? He did it through his image. He would have these statues carved of himself, and those statues were then scattered across that empire to all the different corners and little hamlets and towns and cities of that empire, which meant it sent a very clear message that this is my land, right? His image represented his presence and his authority to the citizens in that particular location. And he's saying, this is my territory, you are my people, you are under my authority, you are expected to obey my laws. Now, Genesis comes along and says, we are made in the image of God. That's not a new phrase. It's a phrase that was familiar to the people in that world, which meant that man, in the created order, our place is that we bear that image, and as God's image bearers, we also communicate that rule, that authority, wherever he puts us. And God has scattered us, listen, both geographically across the face of the earth, but also, think about this, he's also scattered us vocationally across the face of the earth. The image of the living God scattered across creation to represent his presence and his authority. I want you to go back, look at verse 26 again. I want you to notice how closely this idea of the image of God is tied to the authority of God. Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule. So that they may rule over the fish and the birds and the livestock and over all the creatures that move along the ground. Now, here's what's also very interesting. Like I told you before, this idea of the image of God was not a new phrase, right? This was not introduced or coined in the book of Genesis. In the ancient world, this idea of the image of God was used, but it was only used for a very select, very exclusive group of people. The only people that could carry the title as image bearers were people who were actually kings and queens, people of royal blood, royal lineage, monarchs. And if you were a king or a queen, if you were a monarch, if you were a royal, you could be, or you could have, or you could hold the title image of God. But then Genesis comes along and turns this idea on its ear, because Genesis tells us that the image of God was not reserved for a select few. It was not saved and just only bestowed upon the elites and the royals and those in authority. The way it is used in Genesis means it applies to all men. It is a title for every woman. The image of God means that there is royalty, in a way, there is royalty, there is dignity, there is responsibility, and there is authority in every single one of us. Doesn't matter what job you do, or how much you make, or how known you are, or where you spend your time doing your work. You are an image bearer. And Genesis comes along and uses that image and assigns that title to everyone, to the ditch diggers, to the stone carvers, to the farmers, to the merchants, everyone. One of the problems that we have with work is that we have forgotten our identities. We don't see the meaning of the things that we do because we have forgotten who we actually are. We are the princes and princesses, the kings and the queens. We are the image bearers of God that he has placed all around this world, both geographically and vocationally. And probably the reason we don't understand this is because although sin did not give us work, sin has disfigured our work. Genesis chapter 3, sin has entered the world, and there's a consequence to that sin. And one of the consequences that God lays out is this. He says, "Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you. You will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food." This is the moment everything changes. Here's what I want you to notice, though, is that the curse touches our work, but it does not create work. Now, work is not introduced because of sin, but how we experience work is affected because of sin. So work was actually not a punishment, but toil is what God calls it. Toil was punishment. See, before sin entered the world, God had already given Adam and Eve a job. He'd given them authority over creation, to subdue creation, to work in creation. In Genesis 2, God tells us he placed him and her in the garden to work it and take care of it. That was before the fall. Work was a part of paradise. Work was creative. Work was collaborative. Work was meaningful. It was an expression of being made in the image of a God who is a God who works. But then sin comes in, and what happens? The ground begins to resist. The environment that we work in begins to push back. And frustration enters the picture. And now our work feels like toil. So what once was marked by harmony is now marked by division, because that's what sin does. It divides, it separates. Remember, we think it's only separating us from God, right? Sin enters the world and it separates, it breaks our relationship with God, and it absolutely does. But it also breaks our relationship with one another. That's why you and I sometimes have conflict. And it breaks our relationship, not just with God, not with one another, but it also breaks our relationship with creation itself. And now the world resists our work. So there is now division. There's division between us and the earth. And what do we have? We have thorns and thistles. Now, of course, this was spoken to an agrarian world where they farm the land, right? We don't farm the land as much, but let me tell you something. I don't have to ask any of you. You know exactly where the thorns and the thistles of your work lie. These are the things that we all deal with. Every job, every vocation, every career comes with its own set of thorns and thistles that make this work hard, harder than it was ever meant to be or designed to be. So there's division between us and the earth. There's division between us and our work. Now it's painful toil. And it creates a division between us and our sense of purpose. So it's no wonder that work sometimes feels unspiritual, and it feels like our work has now been cut off or it's separate from our faith. It's no wonder that work often feels frustrating. You know why it's so frustrating? Because you'll never finish it. I don't know if you've come to this realization or not. It's a hard pill to swallow, but your work, no matter how much you give to it or how hard you work at it, it will always be unfinished. It will always be incomplete. We're going to pour out our effort, and it's rarely going to feel like enough because you know what? There's always more meetings. There's always more deadlines. There are always more emails. There's always going to be something to do. One more revision, one more email, one more meeting, one more deadline. But here's the good news. Even though sin makes our work into toil, when we come to faith in Jesus, he can redeem our vision for our work. He can redeem the work that we do. He restores its purpose. Through the gospel, he reframes our effort. He reconnects our labor to God's greater mission of renewing and restoring the earth. So no, work is not a curse, it's a calling. Even in a world full of resistance, we still have the opportunity through our work to reflect a God who still works and who is still working to make things new. But you've got to let go of the expectation of completion. It's killing you. You keep thinking, if I can just climb to that next mountain, if I could just have that next achievement, if I could just get to that next promotion, if I could just find that next raise, if I could just open that next store, if I could just open a new branch, whatever that thing is, I will finally arrive. You will never be complete, and you can't expect your work to give you a sense of completion. Completion is running you, grinding you into the ground. So you have to jettison the idea of completion, and what you have to adopt is the posture of contribution. I'm not going to complete the work, but that's not the purpose of work. My work, the purpose of my work is not to complete anything, it's to contribute, to play a part in what God is doing in the world. Let me show you this in the New Testament. So in 1 Corinthians, Paul is writing to a church full of new believers, and like many of us, these new believers are trying to work out, how do I live my faith in this current world, right? What do I do now? I'm a new person, I'm a new creation, I have new values, I'm new, right? How do I live in the world? And they're asking this question because they don't know what to do with it. And they're thinking, something so significant has happened to me, something so seismic has shifted within me that I need to do something just as significant, and I need to do something just as seismic. I need to make a change. And so they're asking Paul, what do I do? Do I quit my job? Do I go on the mission field? Do I become a pastor? Do I become this? And they're asking Paul this question because they feel like they need to do something more spiritually significant, something more sacred. And here's what Paul tells these believers. He says, nevertheless, each person should live as a believer, listen, in whatever situation the Lord has assigned to them, just as God called them. This is the rule I lay down in all the churches. So it doesn't matter what church I'm talking to. I'm still talking to people who are wrestling with the same issue. They want to do something significant. They want to be part of something spiritual. And they're asking, do I leave my job? Do I move away from my home? Do I go on the mission field? He goes, no. Doesn't matter who I'm talking to. My point is this: stay right where you are. You don't have to leave your job or abandon your position or walk away from your current life to serve God and to please him. Because many times God put you there already to have influence where you are. Remember I told you the king scatters his images across the world so people will know who he is. Your king has placed you as his image bearer in that location and in that vocation to do that same thing. A little bit later, he goes, brothers and sisters, each person as responsible to God should remain in the situation they were in when God called them. Here's what I need you to do. Here's what I want you to take into your job, into your office, into your classroom, into your workplace tomorrow morning. In both verses, Paul uses this word called, and that's a spiritually loaded word that we often associate. If someone's called, I'm called into salvation, or I'm called to ministry, or I'm called to missions. And that's true. Some of us are. But he is also using that same word in the context of work. And that's not an accident. I think what Paul is doing is he is deliberately blurring the line between the secular and the sacred. And he is saying your job, your profession, your vocation, it's a calling. And it's no more or less significant or sacred than my calling. One of my great fears is some of you sit out there and you think, what I do is more significant than what you do. That what I do is more sacred than what you do. And that's just not true. Your work has significance and purpose. It's sacred. It's endued with God's authority, with his dignity. Your work is not just a placeholder, and it is certainly not only a paycheck. It's a calling on your life. But we forget that. You know why? Because we look at work as a way to advance ourselves. That's all we see it. We have diminished our own idea of work because work is how we advance ourselves. It's how we work for our own good. There's a guy by the name of Robert Bella talks about in the American world, particularly in the American church, we are racked with the disease of individualism. And because we hold the individual, our own self-fulfillment, our own self-realization, right? The agenda of the individual, the purposes of the individual, we hold that up as the highest good. And we have abandoned the pursuit of the common good. And so what happens is we live next to each other. We don't live with each other, and we certainly don't live for each other. And he says, that's what we have to get back to. Because what he writes is this, he goes, to make a real difference, there has to be a reappropriation of the idea of vocation. You got to reimagine your job. You've got to rethink your job, and we have to return in a new way to the idea, listen, of work as contribution to the good of all, not merely as a means of one's own advancement. And an old theologian by the name of Thomas Merton said it this way: all vocation, all work is intended by God to manifest his love in the world. And you've heard me say it before. Work is the primary way we love our neighbor. Love isn't just a feeling you have. Love is the excellence you bring. Love is the integrity that you operate with. Love is the patience that you show. Love is the service that you give. Love is the goods that you create for the benefit and the blessing of the people in this world. So when you teach students, when you fix plumbing, when you care for patients, when you build code, when you lead teams, when you deliver packages, when you sell shoes, you are contributing to the good of others. You're participating in the common good of the world. You are loving your neighbor. Because work is not separated from our faith. Work is the platform for our faith to be expressed to the world. But the problem is we have a terrible relationship with work. You know why? We want work to do for us what only God can do. See, we want work to save us. In fact, work is the secular path of salvation. You know why? Because what do we want most? We want to be someone of significance. We want to be someone of substance. We want to be remembered, right? That's what we want. In fact, I am convinced we're not so much afraid of dying as we are afraid of being forgotten. Because if we're forgotten, then it's like we never existed at all, and that terrifies us. So what do? We work. We work to build a legacy. We want to leave something behind that people will remember us by, and so we work, and we get up every day, and we go to our jobs, and we give ourselves away every single day, and we lay all of our lives on the altar. We sacrifice our youth, our years, our time, our talents. We sacrifice sometimes even our families. We lay our families on the altar of our own success so that one day when we're gone, we won't be forgotten. And in doing so, what we're doing is we're asking work to do for us what only God can do, but here's the problem with that. It can't, and it won't, and it just leaves us frustrated and exhausted. But that's where the gospel comes in and changes everything. And how does the gospel change everything? Because the gospel tells us you are significant and substantial and worthy. You're worth dying for. You're loved. And it sets us free from that, right? Because the gospel tells us that your value is never going to be determined by your vocation, and your worth is never going to be based on your net worth. Who you are as an individual, your significance is not based on your skills or the sum of your assets. And when we can believe that, you know what we get? We get to finally rest. But here's our problem. We think rest has to be earned, but that's not biblical. You don't ever get to earn your rest. You just receive your rest. Remember the thief on the cross? The thief on the cross, hanging there next to Jesus, looks at Jesus and says, will you remember me when you come into your kingdom? And the thing that's more shocking than the request is Jesus' response. Today you will be with me in paradise. Now I'd like to remind you, that thief was not coming down off the cross. He was not in timeout. He was going to die there. He had no future. He wasn't going to work for anyone. He wasn't going to do any good for anyone, and probably he had never done any good for anyone because that's why he was already hung on a cross. He had never done any good work and would never do any good work, but Jesus said, you will still be with me in paradise. Why is that? Because rest is received, not earned. And I don't know why we're surprised by that, because it was written into the code of creation. You forget, and I want to remind you, Adam's first full day on the earth was a day of rest. We thought it came at the end of his work week, but it actually came at the beginning of his work week. And why is that? Because rest is always received and it's never earned. That's why Jesus said to his people, said to the audience, come unto me, all you who are weary, and some of you are so weary. You're so tired, you're so exhausted from all the work you're doing to try to earn your own salvation, to try to set yourself apart. You're so tired, and Jesus just says to you, the invitation is the same, come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest. That's what the gospel can do for us. That's what the gospel can mean to you. And it can unleash you to work for a whole new reason and in whole new ways. Let's pray together. God, help us to realize that. Help us to walk into our offices and into our classrooms. Help us to walk onto the job site tomorrow, wherever we find ourselves tomorrow morning. Help us to walk out into that with this new sense of purpose, that we are there to contribute, to bless, to invest, to work for someone else's benefit and to be a blessing to them. God, unleash that across us. Help us to be set free from work as a taskmaster. Help us to be set free from work as the slave driver. Help us to be set free from seeing work as the way that we save ourselves. And if we've not yet put our faith in you, help us to find that today. Help us to put our faith in you today so we can be set free from that thing. And you give us a new way to live in the world that we exist in today. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.